Okay, so it looks like we have the live stream for YouTube going. And now let me record. Okay, everyone. So sorry about that. My internet went out. They are building a house next door, and I think they hit my fiber line. And so I'm hooked to my phone, and hopefully that will carry me throughout the whole presentation. So this one is about immigration and US citizenship. So so sorry about that. My internet went out. They are building a house next door, and I think, okay, all righty. Now, let me, hopefully you all can see my presentation here. You- Okay. So hopefully everybody can see this presentation about immigration and citizenship. One moment. Okay, so everybody hang on with me. I'm so sorry. Just let the people know that that I'm back on. I told a bunch of people that my internet was down. Okay. All righty. So hopefully you're seeing the screen about US citizenship and immigration. And so that's the topic I want to talk about because what's going on right now, um, in the country, what's going on, with all these admins. So because of what's going on, I wanted to talk about. And so here we go. Okay. So US immigration and citizenship. Why your US citizenship matters. So these are going to be rights that you have as a US citizen that someone who comes in this country doesn't have. It's the reason why people are seeking U.S. citizenship. Besides, it's a free country, freedom of speech, a lot of different things like that, and you can make a lot of money in America, even though it costs a lot of money to live in America. But so these are rights that you get if you're a U.S. citizen. They're only available to U.S. citizens. And contrary to what you're hearing in the news, these rights are not knowingly or freely given to people who are not US citizens. And a lot or most of these rights are not being exploited by people who are not US citizens. So the right to vote in federal elections and then eligibility for federal elected office, access to certain federal jobs and security clearances, the ability to petition for certain family members. What that one means is if you were an immigrant and you gained U.S. status, like the only people who were not born in this country who can bring their family members over are people who made it to the status of U.S. citizen. Okay. U.S. passport and consular protection abroad. So if you travel back and forth from the U.S., but you're not a U.S. citizen, like if you're a licensed permanent resident or anything like that, and you go abroad and something happens, you can't access the U.S. embassy or anything else for protection. That protection abroad is only for US citizens. The unrestricted ability to travel and re-enter this country, freedom from deportation. We don't deport US citizens, except this president has deported US citizens. Eligibility for certain federal grants and benefits. That means Medicaid and Medicare, in most circumstances, food stamps and different things like that. You can't be a non-US citizen and get those benefits unless you are a certain protected class of asylum seekers. That is the only exception to that. And then the right to serve on a federal jury. All these things are rights that are only granted to US citizens. Okay. So there's limits on constitutional protections for people that are here and they're non-citizens. But look, the main constitutional protections that we're concerned with are available to non-US citizens, that being the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, those about search and seizure, um, the First and Second Amendment. Now, the Second Amendment with some reservation. If you are not a US citizen, there's going to be a limitation on you carrying firearms and different things like that. So, um, this country is the only one I know of, and it's probably the only country in the world where you have certain constitutional protections that are only available to citizens, that if you're a non-citizen, you have them from the minute your foot touches the ground here. So that's something that's important to know. Just because someone may be here and be undocumented, they are a non-citizen, they even if they're here unlawfully, there are still most of the constitutional protections, they are entitled to them. That is written though in the Constitution. So way back in the 1700s, the founding fathers did that. That's not new. That's not something that's recent that's been done in the past 1 or 200 years. It was back when they made the Constitution, and as US statute and law began to be developed, those protections were there. So as you can see on this graph, there's limits on constitutional protections, but the main ones that we recognize in this country, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom against self-incrimination, you're entitled to a lawyer if you're in a criminal process, all those kind of things, they get that the minute they step foot in this country. Okay. Then, so this is the historical highlights of immigration law in this country. So see, the first one starts with 1790. So remember when I said this is way back with the founding fathers. The politicians right now try to make it like these are new issues. Oh, the Democrats have passed this bill or done that bill. Really, no party has done anything meaningful about immigration in the past probably 60 or 70 years, but anything that's helpful that solves the problem. But as you can see, the first Immigration Act was in 1790. That was the first Naturalization Act, which restricted naturalization to free white persons of good character, and they had to have 2 years of residency. So naturalization is a process where you were not here, you go through a process and then you could become a citizen. So this would be if in 1790, this would be if your Irishmen and British were coming over, different things like that, which you can imagine. So after 1776, then you have the Revolutionary War, then you have America is firm in its stance as a nation. George Washington is the president. But as you can imagine, a lot of people in this country had family where in England and Ireland and different places like that, and they wanted to bring them over and they wanted them to be American citizens, and that's how this got started. So then you see in 1870, which was after the Civil War, and then the 14th Amendment came, naturalization extended to people of African descent. Other racial groups were still excluded. Well, they needed to do that because they still wanted us here to do the work. So anyway, you see the progression. My whole point of showing this slide though was to say what I said, immigration is not new. It's been the laws started back in the 1700s. Okay. So citizenship by birth, because we know right now there's a lot of talk about birthright citizenship. All right, so eligibility, any individual born on US soil. So we see that says any individual. Where does this? This is a mixture of constitutional and statutory law. Nobody's out here making up anything except the current president. But this has always been the case. If you were born on US soil, no matter who your parents are, if this is where you entered the world at, you're a US citizen. The exception is children born to foreign diplomats with diplomatic immunity. That's because a diplomat in this country that has diplomatic immunity is still a citizen of their country. They're a walking sovereign within themselves. And so nothing that they like, if they have a child here, that doesn't give that child US citizenship. You see the legal basis is the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution and this immigration and naturalization uh, statute right here. So that's exactly how it reads. Any individual, it doesn't put any kind of qualifier on it. If you're born in the US, you're a US citizen, period. That stems from the Constitution. It stems from this statute. Statutes come from Congress. Congress passes the law, the president enforces the law. So, proof of citizenship, this says typically established with a U.S. birth certificate, but the best way these days to establish U.S. citizenship is a passport. Just because there's so many issues with documents these days and different things like that, you can use a U.S. birth certificate, but the best way to establish citizenship is with a passport. I encourage everyone to have a passport, even if you never intend to leave this country, because of what we're seeing going on today. How many of us can imagine that a U.S. birth certificate is not going to get it done for this administration? A passport is a verification of your citizenship. Truly, a birth certificate only proves that you were born and where you were born and on what day you was born, but it's really not the best proof of U.S. citizen or of your citizenship in any country. Um, so, so this birthright citizenship controversy. So the president did an executive order where he tried to make it where if you were born in this country, but you see right here, it says um, the child is not an automatic U.S. citizen if the mother was unlawfully present in the U.S. and the father was neither a U.S. citizen nor an LPR. That's a legal permanent resident at the time of birth. Or the mother was in the U.S. on a temporary status like student or worker or tourist visa, and the father was neither a citizen or legal permanent resident. So that was how he was trying to end birthright citizenship right there. That's what, so the problem though is what I said. He did this by executive order. When in the previous screen I just showed you there's the Constitution and there's statutes that are passed by Congress. So the president is basically trying to change the Constitution and a federal statute by executive order. And you can't do that. So even if you agree that this should be done, there's still a way to do it. And the way he's trying to do it by executive order is not the way to do it because the executive does not create law. The executive enforces whatever the law is on the books. So if it's not working or people don't like it, then that's when you lobby your congressperson to change the law. But the president shouldn't be doing this by executive order. Okay. So hence this right here, Trump versus CASA and the status of the executive order. The order was blocked at the federal district court and the circuit court level, which is the two levels before the Supreme Court. So, so basically, the court came out and said, Mr. President, you can't do that. You can't change law by executive order. So that's why that hasn't been enacted yet. So temporary lawful presence, non-immigrant visas. So I wanted to explain to y'all how some people are here, as this is titled temporary lawful presence. Okay, so they have a right to be here temporarily, but they don't have a right to be here and exercise the full rights of citizenship. So the B1 and the B2 visitor visas, I think sometimes some of us have heard about that. That's short stays for business or tourism, and you're admitted for months rather than years. These are your special scientists that may become literally like a rocket scientist that will come from Russia to work at NASA and then go home after 3 or 4 months. This is people that come and work in American corporations that have um special skills or abilities and they'll come on a B1 or B2, short stays for business or tourism, and they're admitted for months and not for years. Okay. So the F1 and the M1 student visas, academic and vocational study with limited work and practical training. So you can think doctors from other countries, um, different things like that. They'll come and you see limited work and practical training. That's where we'll have like partnerships with other countries where their doctors come and train here. That's what that's for. The J1 exchange visitors, um, scholars, trainees, au pairs, and physicians. Some face 2-year home residency rule. This is just this scholars, trainees, au pairs, and physicians, actual doctors, not those in school. Now, this H1B this is the one you hear about in the news a lot. You see the specialty occupations, and Trump said this is what he was going to limit. And then you have H2A and H2B, seasonal agricultural and non-agricultural workers. This is the one you'll hear about in the news a lot. But these are, if he limits them, he's going to do what he does with everything else, and he's going to have to change his mind because these exist because we don't have enough of these people in this country. That's why these exist. And if he wants phone and internet service to continue to work, he's going to do this because anybody who know if they call AT&T or anybody else, a lot of people that build and work the network are from Nigeria, they from India, they're from all these other places, and this is that H-1B specialty occupation. And then we need our seasonal agricultural workers because almost no one in this country is going to work the fields. And we definitely not going back to the fields. I'm gonna put that on this video. Okay, so then you'll see the other kinds that are not as popular, but I wanted to cover the first few bullet points because these are the ones that we see the most. And these are the ones that, we can be aware of most likely on our jobs. Some of our colleagues, if they come from somewhere else, they're on one of these visas in this country. A visa is always temporary, and it's usually 6 months or less, but it could be 12 or 18 months. Okay, so lawful permanent residence and protected status. I wanted to go through these because these are terms we also hear, and I wanted y'all to know what they mean. So lawful permanent resident, that's the green card. That's the step everybody is trying to get to because that's where you have to get to before you can get US citizenship. And this is the indefinite right to live and work, and you obtain it through family, employment, or the lottery or humanitarian categories. The humanitarian categories, one of them is asylum. They have others like a lot of people if they were that were born in Vietnam, but their fathers are US soldiers who fathered them while they were over there, that's a humanitarian category. And because of course the fathers didn't the American soldiers who fathered children over there, they didn't legitimize them in any way. Most of them wasn't signing birth certificates and things like that. And I actually know a couple of people in that category, but that's how they come over. But this so you'll see it LPR, lawful permanent resident. That's the green card that you hear people talk about. That's the indefinite right to live and work over here legally. This is the step right before they get their US citizenship. Conditional permanent resident is a 2-year green card for recent marriages and EB5 investors. And so this is like if you marry someone, if a foreigner marries an American, there's still a process. They don't automatically get US citizenship. And so this is for them. This is that refugee and asylee status I was talking about. This is another status. It's called withholding of removal and convention against torture protection. So this is what, if you remember the guy, Abrego, his name was something like that. He had got taken, he got sent over to Ecuador, that country where they had the big prison and they shipped a bunch of people over there. He had a withhold from removal. He had an order from the court that said he could not be removed from this country. So once again, if we're a nation of laws and we want to immigration, then we need to enforce immigration and follow the laws. It's a valid protected status to have the status called withholding of removal, and that's what he had. That's why he couldn't be removed, and that's why the U.S. congressman went over there, and the court told Trump to bring him back over here. Now, surely there's other people that were taken and swept up and were taken to that facility over there. There's allegations there's still U.S. citizens over there, and there's other people with these protected statuses. But I want to be clear about how people are lawfully over here and how people are unlawfully over here because the current information in the media blurs the line so bad. They make it like if you're not a US citizen, that everybody that's not a US citizen is over here illegally. And this is just not the case. Temporary protected status and deferred enforced departure. This is a temporary stay and they get a work authorization for certain nationals of designated countries. Okay, this temporary protected status, that's what the Haitians have. And this status right here, he's trying to end and send people back to where they came from. Now, whether he should or he shouldn't is everyone will have their own opinion, and that's fine. Going back to this is America, you're entitled to think what you want to think and have the opinion. Um, but this temporary protected status, if someone has that status, you see the title of this is lawful permanent resident and protected status. These people are not over here unlawfully. They over here under the law of the United States. So to call them illegals, undocumented, and unlawful entries is just incorrect. So as long as they have temporary protected status, they have deferred enforced departure, or they have this withholding of removal, then they're here lawfully. And there needs to be a determination what the US government wants to do with them, but it's unfair to call them illegals or undocumented people. These are all other statuses: humanitarian paroles, US visas for crime victims, trafficking victims. This VAWA is victims against I'm sorry, victims again, Violence Against Women's Act. That can happen, like a lot of us know what goes on in Middle Eastern countries to women if they so-called disobey or if they act in a certain way. If they happen to make it to the States, they can claim this Violence Against Women's Act and try to get permission to stay. Deferred action, which includes DACA, we've all heard of DACA. That's prosecutorial discretion with a work authorization, but they don't have lawful status. That's the big debate. These people have been here since they were 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 8 years old, or 9 years old. In other words, they were just children drug over here by their parents. And they're asking the US government to consider that, hey, I've been here since I was 2 years old. I've graduated from high school. I've graduated from college. I have a wife now and I have children. So will you please let me stay? And you see this prosecutorial discretion. So that is where the US government, that's the agreement right now, is that so the agreement that Barack had is we're not prosecuting anyone under DACA. We're going to let you stay here. But the deal was the US government was supposed to work out what they want to do with them. Ideally, they would have done that when a president was in office that wanted to work with these people who 99.9% of them were children. They're adults now because of like DACA is back from the 80s, probably at least. They're adults now, but they still have this they have this unlawful status. So, so the situation with them, why you can't really call that they are unlawful, but there's an agreement with the US government right now. And so the US government has promised to determine something with their status, but has not done that yet. They need to act on that. And so only lawful permanent residents may naturalize, making the green card the usual gateway to citizenship. So that's why everybody's over here working for the green card. Okay. I know I'm kind of flying through this because I want to make sure I cover some things because I'm going to get to the part that's important about your US citizenship and like how you can't just lose it. They can't just take it from you. Okay. So this is the part I want you to know about this. So see, this is lawful and unlawful entry into the United States. Really, the only lawful way to come into the United States is called inspection and admission. You have to show up at a point, a station or a point of entry at the border and present yourself to an officer for inspection. And then and then to like this is a designated port of entry. Because but really if you just appear at any station, they can do this. But so you show up and you submit yourself for inspection and admission. If they inspect you and they ask you questions and then they tell you to come into the country, which 9 times out of 10 is how it happens, then you're in, and that's lawful. And that's how you are here lawfully. And then from there you start the process to become the LPR. So you come you present So if you are in Mexico and you swim across the Rio Grande and you end up on American soil and you weave your way through the desert and you end up in Arizona and you apply for a job and you start working, you're not lawful because you didn't stop at a port of entry at a designated spot or any station to be inspected and admitted. So what is the inspection? I mean, whatever you have with you, a suitcase, a purse, or whatever, yeah, they're going to look through that, but they're also going to ask you, why are you coming? Where are you coming from? Do you have family here? What do you plan to do when you get here? Do you have any affiliation with any gangs or crime in the country you came from? Do you have how many people are in your party? How many people are with you? They're going to ask you all those questions. And CBP is the Border Patrol. They're going to ask these questions. And then those officers, they're going to say, okay, and then they're going to admit you into the country. And then you're in the country. And so if that's the process, they can't, which a lot of people are doing. If you all remember with COVID and then Biden was in office and you saw people stacked up at the border, those are people who were trying to, okay, so you saw people stacked up at the border and you saw people waiting. But you also know people were still just running across the Rio Grande. They're coming under tunnels from Mexico to America. Those people are coming that way. But there was a bunch of people at the border because they're waiting to do this. And you're going to see why those people were waiting at the border to do this inspection and admission. You're going to see why in a minute. So really the complaint by Republicans and some people's like, oh, they're just letting anybody in. The law says all you have to do is present yourself to the border and be inspected and admitted, and that's all you have to do. If they don't like that, they need to change the law. But you can't say, oh, they're just letting everybody in because right now, anybody that shows up at the border, for the most part, they're getting let in. If you show up for inspection and admission, they're getting let in because that's not a high bar. You just answer those few questions and then they let you in. Okay, so admission means lawful entry after inspection and authorization by the immigration officer. Hold on one second. Let me move this because I can't see. Parole is permission to enter physically without a formal admission, but they still have permission to physically come into the country. So then there's entry without inspection. So that's what we're talking about, just crossing the river and going through the desert and coming in. That's unlawful. So improper entry into the US, that's a misdemeanor the first time you do it. If you enter again after you've been removed, that's a felony. So the deal with that is if you are caught like that and like you were deported and you come back in again, or if you're caught under most circumstances with an improper entry, you can be excluded for years, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. You could be excluded from coming to the US and getting in or for trying for legal residency. So a lot of people don't want to risk that. That's why you saw people stacked up at the border trying to come in the right way, as opposed to people who come in unlawfully, because once you're caught, it and so now though I think they are going for a lifetime ban now if you're caught. That's what this administration is doing. So I hope this part is clear to everybody. There's really only one lawful way to enter the United States, and then you get on the path. You start working your way towards, you get, permission to work, you file the paperwork, they give you permission to work, then you can get a job, and then you start working towards LPR. Or you see when you show up at the station and then you say, I'm fleeing like I'm Iran or Iraq because um my entire family was killed and I'm a single woman and I will be sold into slavery or sex slave or whatever, right? You want some kind of asylum, or you're a refugee because whatever your native people are don't have a homeland, like the Kurds. Saddam Hussein ran them out of Kurdistan, different things like that. Okay. So this I put this in here and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just to say, see removal proceedings, process and options. There's a process. There's a process to come in and then there's a process to get people out. If they don't like the process to get people out, they need to change it. You guys see all these section sites right here. My big thing as an attorney is because the politics you see on the news, oh, put everybody out, send everybody out. You can't do that. You have to go to court and you have to meet the statutory requirements to remove somebody. And if you don't meet the statutory requirements as the United States government and you can't prove why they should be removed, then they get to stay. So all I had to say, if the politicians don't like how it's going, they're the ones in charge. They've been there for decades. A lot of them have been there 30, 40, 50 years, and the immigration law has not changed since I was born in 1973. There's been no changes. So I just wanted you all to know that a lot the politics you hear on the news is one thing, but when you actually go to court and you stand in front of a judge, you see all these statute numbers here. You got to have your stuff in order on both sides. If the immigrant wants to stay, they have to have their case in order. If the government wants them to be removed, they have to have their case in order. And everything goes by the statute. If the politicians don't like how it's going, they need to change the law because in some respects, it's really hard to deport somebody. In other respects, depending on what they did, if they're criminals and stuff, yeah, it's easy. But if they're here working and doing a bunch of stuff, the immigration judges are not too keen on putting them out. Okay. This acquisition and derivation, this is just see it said citizenship passed from U.S. citizen parents before and after birth. That's just another way to acquire U.S. citizenship. And sometimes that happens like it's a different rule if you're like born to military parents and you were born overseas, but that's just basically the concept. This is birth abroad of U.S. citizens. If you happen to be traveling um and you have your baby overseas, or if you marry somebody overseas and have a baby over there, this is how this works. The US law: two married US citizen parents, usually at least one parent, must have resided in the US prior to the child's birth. Okay, so one US citizen parent married to a foreign national, then this is how it works. And then unmarried US citizen mother. If the child is born out of wedlock, the child can get U.S. citizenship at birth if the mother was physically present in the U.S. or its outlying possessions for at least one continuous year prior to the child's birth. So you got to keep that in mind. You had to be physically in the U.S. if you want your child to acquire U.S. citizenship at birth. Now, your child can get it after birth. That was the previous slide about acquisition and derivation and stuff like that. But if you want your child upon birth in a foreign country to immediately be a U.S. citizen, you have to meet this requirement. And with the way travel is now, people live overseas. I know a lot of people, they have jobs overseas. Then this is something they need to be aware of. Like you might be over there. That's why sometimes too, because I know several, like as an attorney, FedEx hires lawyers and they send them to Dubai, and you work a 4-year contract for FedEx. You work it in Dubai. And so I know a couple, they got married and then she got pregnant. So she came back because she was a teacher. So it's a lot of American teachers over there too. And so she came back and was here at, a certain period of time. Like this says 1 year, but if you come back like right when you get pregnant, you could be here. You go back over there, you could have a baby over there. But some people want to make sure that the child is, so they just come over here and have the baby here and then they go back. So there has to be some kind of rule for it though, because so many US citizens live abroad. So they have to have a rule for it. Unmarried US citizen father. This the rule if the father um the father is the US citizen, but he's not married. And then the previous one was the rule if the mother is the US citizen, but she's not married and the father is a foreign national. Automatic acquisition of citizenship after birth. This is how the Child Citizenship Act of 2000, a child automatically gets it if at least one parent is a US citizen, the child is under 18, all these little rules right here. I just wanted y'all to see that there's rules for all of this stuff. For how you get the US citizenship. There's rules for all of it. Nothing is just made up or done willy-nilly. This INA is Immigration and Naturalization Act, and these are the section numbers for that. And then this is USC is the United States Code. So there's statutes, that's actually called the law for everything that goes on. I'm trying to get to the part. Okay, so documenting US citizenship. I want y'all to know how to do this. So, consular report of birth abroad. This is what military kids have that were born in other countries. Or like I said, if you were traveling, right? So you apply for it at the nearest US consular post. Primary evidence of US citizenship equivalent to a US birth certificate. So that's why I said to a US birth certificate isn't always the best way to do it. Then you apply for the US passport, enroll the child in school, obtain a social security number, meet other requirements. So then the US citizenship right that you get is valid for life. It never expires. US passport. It's a practical and widely accepted form of proof. It confirms citizenship status after legal determination by a consular office or a passport agency. This is why I was saying the US passport is the best way to prove you're a US citizen because it was confirmed by a consular office or a passport agency. And it's typically the fastest and most accessible of the three documents to obtain. If you get your passport and hold on to it, it facilitates travel and re-entry. The other reason to have a US passport is because, I mean, you don't know what's going on. We do have two countries attached to us, and it's it's not as easy to get back into the country with a birth certificate. Like they could refuse you entry, but they can't refuse you entry with a US passport. That's proof that you're a US citizen, and there's actually a law that says you can't refuse a US citizen re-entry into the country for any reason. So the only deal with the passport, of course, this says, yeah, it's valid for 5 years if the kid is under 16. For adults, it's valid for 10 years. Don't let it expire. Um, and I encourage everyone to get one because that's really the best and almost only proof of your US citizenship. Like I said, if you have to leave the country for some reason, there's no guarantee they'll let you in with a driver's license or with your US birth certificate. Um, a certificate of citizenship. Who gets this? Um, those who acquire US citizenship at birth, for example, born abroad, people born abroad. This is another way that they have proof. Um, they can get a US passport, but probably before that, they have to get this certificate of citizenship. Naturalization. Okay, so naturalization is the step after the lawful permanent resident. So you got to be at least 18 and have been a lawful permanent resident for 5 years immediately before you file this form N-400. You have to maintain a continuous residence in the US for 5 years. Now, side note, because I'm working on my Mexican residency, with Mexico, you can go to Mexico and present at the border, or you can present at an office in the country. You can give them the application for your Mexican residency. You can leave and never go back until 4 years later. And then when you go back, they'll give you Mexican residency. You don't, Mexico is one of a few countries, there's only a handful, where you don't actually have to stay in country to gain their citizenship. But in the US and a lot of other countries, you do. And this says 5 years. I know some other countries are only like 2 or 3 years, but you have to maintain continuous residence in the US for 5 years. Be physically present in the US for at least 30 months out of the 5 years prior to filing. You have to have been here. So see this number three says maintain a continuous residence. You could, the rich Saudis and the people that come over here, they can have a house and they can say this is my residence, but they could be gone 11 out of 12 months of the year. So what this is saying, you have to physically be here in the US. You can't be anywhere else for 30 months out of the 60 months prior to your filing. Reside for at least 3 months in the district or state where the application is filed. Demonstrate good moral character during the statutory period. Be attached to the principles of the U.S. Constitution. Pass an English language or U.S. civics or history exam unless you have a waiver for that. And you got to register for the selective service if you're between 18 and 25. So these are the requirements. So once you have lawfully presented yourself to the border, you were inspected, you were admitted into the country, you worked for a period of time, you've been here, you're over 18, you obtained that lawful permanent residence, you had a green card for 5 years, then you can apply with this N-400 application. You can apply, and then that's applying for naturalization. Now, you doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you can apply for it. And that's why you hear some people say they had to work for 15 or 20 years before they could get their US citizenship. These are the things that'll disqualify you because of conduct. These are all things we can guess: habitual drunkenness, drug abuse, commission of crimes, false testimony for immigration benefits. Those things will keep you from getting citizenship. Naturalization as the spouse of a U.S. citizen, there's a 3-year rule. So this is what happens if you're an American and you marry someone and you want to make them an American citizen. This is the process for that. So there actually is one. Um, let's see. They're starting to crack down on the marital thing too. Military service is another way that you can gain U.S. citizenship. Must have served honorably in the armed forces for at least a year. You got to be a LPR at the time you file the N-400, and you got to meet other general requirements like the 30 months of physical presence and all that kind of stuff. So, let's see. This is just the procedure of how you do it. Once you've done all the things I said, you file the N-400, pay the filing fee, and you go through all the other steps they want you to go through. Let me get to dual citizenship. I just said I was looking at my Mexican residency. So no one's talking about expatriating yourself. When you expatriate yourself, you give up the rights of citizenship to one country and then you accept it in another country. You don't have to do that. You can keep your American citizenship and then you can become a citizen of another country as well. Um, Dual citizenship, dual citizenship. Okay, loss of U.S. nationality, relinquishment, renunciation, and the intent standard. This is the last thing I wanted to cover, and I wanted to get this out here because, especially in a lot of communities where this administration think they're gonna roll the clock back and things are gonna go back to the way they used to be, or when they put threats out there about, you know, people's citizenship status, we need to know how that works. So the loss of U.S. citizenship, formerly known as loss of nationality, can occur in two ways. One way is relinquishment. The broader concept, including various actions that can lead to the loss of citizenship indirectly. Hang on, my little thing is in the way. I'm sorry. Indirectly if done with intent. It occurs when a U.S. citizen voluntarily performs an expatriating act intending to give up U.S. citizenship, and then renunciation, a subset of relinquishment. So relinquishment is one thing, but inside of that is renunciation. And it's the most formal and explicit method involving clear and deliberate act before a U.S. consular office abroad. You got to understand the distinction between the two, because there are different implications, including tax implications, immigration, and civil implications. So, okay, so let's see. So, expatriating acts. So there's 7 things, 7 acts that can happen. 6 are relinquishment that can expatriate you. If you become a naturalized citizen of a foreign country, and if you do that voluntarily with the intent to give up U.S. citizenship. Now, remember, I just said you could be a dual citizen. It's okay. You could be a U.S. citizen and you can be a Mexican citizen. So when I become a Mexican citizen, I'm not gonna do that with the intent to give up my U.S. citizenship. I'm doing that with the intent to maintain my U.S. citizenship. So this right here is the caveat that you can become a dual citizen, but you just, when you do it, you don't intend to give up your U.S. citizenship. You take an oath or allegiance or declaration of allegiance to a
Oh,
foreign.
wow. They made a lot.
Um, Working for a foreign government, that'll do it. Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. Let me change my screen. And then formally renouncing U.S. citizenship before a U.S. diplomat or consular office abroad. This renunciation rather than relinquishment as such, but it's often grouped with a broader expatriation framework. So when you expatriate yourself, you totally give up your U.S. citizenship. Committing an act of treason, attempting to overthrow the U.S. government, or bearing arms against the United States. Rarely applied, but is still recognized as a basis for expatriation. Did we see this? This actual statute, everybody, committing an act of treason, attempting to overthrow the U.S. government. Look at that. Or bearing arms against the United States. Didn't that happen on January 6th? And he trying to get these people money, okay? So anyway, that's an expatriating act. Let me see. So, in order to prove that someone intended to give up their U.S. citizenship, you have to prove that the individual voluntarily committed an expatriating act and that the act was done with the intent to relinquish U.S. citizenship. That's why they having a hard time with the January 6th people, but in any event, they took a step towards expatriating themselves. What they're saying though is that they were defending the country. They weren't trying to give up their citizenship. Administrative presumption of intent. A presumption may arise in some cases. If you apply for a foreign passport, if you vote in a foreign election, or you explicitly tell a consular office that you intend to relinquish your citizenship. But even if you do this, there's still some more steps. This isn't even enough. So, oh, so why would somebody give up their American citizenship? To avoid the public and symbolic nature of formal renunciation. So you just relinquish. To backdate the loss of citizenship for tax or immigration reasons, and to confirm loss of citizenship after acquiring another nationality. So these are very specific reasons that people do it. Most U.S. citizens won't do it for this reason. Um, they have their own other reasons that they do it, but there are every year, it's not a lot, around 1,000 Americans who give up. Those people live in other countries and they know they're never coming back. Now, even if you're a US citizen and you live in another country, you still have to pay income taxes. You got to pay American taxes. So you have to file a tax return.
Mm.
So what happens is you got to file the tax return and you got to pay taxes. And so people who have lived abroad for a long time and they know they're never coming back, or if they come back to the US, they just come on a visa, like a tourist visa for 6 months, and they can see their family and go back to where they live, then that is why they give up their US citizenship because they're tired of paying taxes. And where they live is going to be a better benefit for them to be a citizen of only that country. A lot of Americans who go to Germany do this. I don't know if other countries where it's a higher number, but I know a lot of Americans move to Germany and they expatriate themselves and they become German citizens. Um, okay, so renunciation always involves us making a statement, and it's made in person before an officer outside the US. So if you're outside the US, there's a way to do it. If you're inside the US, there's a way to do it. So there's an actual statute for it. And so a citizen loses their nationality by making a formal renunciation of nationality before a diplomat or consular of the United States in a foreign state in such form as may be prescribed by the Secretary of State. So there's a detailed policy, there's a way to do it, and then they actually, I don't know, they have a role, they have some book somewhere, they got something, and they actually remove your name from there. And once they do that, that's official. But look, you still got to file a form, you got to sign it, you have to pay a fee to actually to give up your US citizenship. You got to pay a fee. So it's not as easy as the US government saying, we're going to take your US citizenship from you, and you can't lose it just by saying, I don't want to be an American citizen anymore. It's so many steps. Then see, you got to schedule an appointment and appear at an embassy or consulate. At the review, you got to demonstrate that the decision is voluntary and intentional. You have to show an understanding of the consequences of losing your rights. You got to take an oath. And then you got to sign a written statement. You got to do all those things. And then these are all the forms that's required to give up your US citizenship. Um, and some of these are just required if you're abroad, but some of them you will sign if you do it in this country. Now most people won't give it up here because once you give it up here, then you got to leave because you're not a citizen anymore. So yes, so then you got to do all these forms. Okay, then you got to pay the renunciation fee. Look how much that is. The current fee for formal renunciation is $2,350 as of 2025. You got to pay this much money. So probably some people probably can't even afford to renounce if they wanted to. So, I mean, this is part of the process. You got to fill out all those forms. You have to appear in person. You have to say it out loud to somebody. They have to believe that you understand what you're doing. You have to explain to them the consequences of giving up your US citizenship. And then certificate of loss of nationality. After the interview, all materials are sent to the Department of State in Washington, D.C. for a final review. If approved, watch it. Look, if approved, they may not even let you do it. The person is issued a certificate of loss of nationality. The effective date of loss is the date the oath was taken, not the date the certificate is approved. So minors under 18 cannot typically renounce citizenship unless they fully understand it, but normally they won't do it. Of course, mentally incompetent people can't do it. But once you do it, it's irrevocable. You can't come back and file a form or pay a fee or do anything else to get your US citizenship back. Which is what it says right here. Irrevocable, once approved, renunciation cannot be undone. Loss of rights. It includes the right to reside in the US, the right to vote, to work without authorization, and to access federal benefits. So someone who renounced it, if you renounce at 50 some years old, like all that social security money, you lose that. You will never get that. Whatever other Medicare, all it, whatever. But usually, I guess if you're somewhere else and you have a better setup, you don't care about that. But I'm just putting that out there. Those are the federal benefits that they mean. People usually work a lifetime and they have those social security benefits, but you would lose all of that. And like I said, there's no form you can file, there's no fee you can pay to get your US citizenship back. Um, so covered expatriates may be subject to the IRS exit tax under 26 USC 877. So there's a tax that you have to pay to give up your US citizenship right now. That's on top of the fee you paid to file the application. Now I know my brother told me the state of Illinois does this, and when people move from Illinois, there's a tax they have to pay when they leave the state. So apparently that's a thing, an exit tax. Um, so renunciants may apply for a visa or another lawful entry document, another lawful entry method to visit the United States. That's what I was saying earlier, like the ones that live in Germany, they give up their US citizenship, they stop paying American taxes, and then if they want to come see family, they just get a visa like any other foreigner would get. Because at the point they give it up, then they are a foreigner. If they wanted to come back, they'd have to go through the immigration process just like any other immigrant. That's what they would have to do if they want it back. Um, okay, so the motivations for giving it up, like I said, the U.S. taxes citizens worldwide on their income, regardless of residence. And so I do a state work, and there's actually too, like, if a US citizen dies, say they got a house in Canada or a house in Mexico or a house in another country, so you pay an estate tax, right? All that stuff, whatever you have worldwide, your assets are added up and counted, and you owe or your estate owes the IRS for whatever you own worldwide. So U.S. citizens abroad must comply with it's complex tax reporting strategies, and even if they pay local taxes in whatever country they live in. So the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act pressures foreign banks to report U.S. account holders, sometimes resulting in account closures. Wealthier individuals may face the exit tax on unrealized capital gains when expatriating. That's true too. So, motivations. Let me see. Long-term residents of another country may feel greater national, cultural, civic affinity in their adopted home. That's true. Like, you know how in New York, it's a lot of Italians up there. And sometimes, like, kids will grow up in a family and their grandmother came from Italy, and then their parents were Americans and they're here. And then they get to a certain age and they want to go to Italy, and then they end up staying in the same village their grandmother grew up in. So they feel closer to the Italian population in Italy than they did in the States, and they want to stay there. And so they know they're never coming back, so they give up their US citizenship. Some countries restrict dual citizenship or bar dual nationals from holding office. And so that's like perhaps if there's someone of Mexican descent in this country and they move to Mexico and they want to run for office there. And Mexico may say, well, you can't be dual citizen and run. You got to give up your US citizenship. So they'll do it because they want to go back and help their native, the people. I mean, maybe they were born in the US, but their families from Mexico. They go there and that's what they want to do. They want to run for office. They want to help people there. And so they give up their US citizenship. Um, let's see. Certain foreign nationality laws or immigration systems require U.S. renunciation to obtain legal status. Let me see. Foreign banks, employers, and governments may discriminate against U.S. persons because of U.S. compliance obligations. So some people, if they have extensive holdings, extensive properties, like in Singapore or in Portugal and different places where Americans have a footprint, it may be easier for them to give up their U.S. citizenship because even if you're an American and you live in other countries in the world, you still have to comply with a lot of American banking and tax laws. And so, whatever country you're in, they don't want to deal with American reporting guidelines. And so, you may not be able to open an account or you may not be able to do business the way you want to do it in another country. So, they just give up their US citizenship and they know they can come back on a visa if they want to come back. Simplifying family affairs. That is one reason why people give up their US citizenship. Political or ideological objections. A small number of people renounce to protest the US government's policies and their foreign relations and how they treat other countries. Others object to surveillance and extraterritorial reach, I'm sorry, of the US government, because like I said, they reach all over the world no matter where you are. Yep. So that is, oh, I made it, even though I had to start late because of my internet problems, and I'm so sorry. But that is the presentation. What I want to do, like I said, is give you guys a broad overview so that when you're hearing some of the stuff on the news, you'll have some kind of frame of reference. But like I said, temporary protected status and different things, those people are not here unlawfully. And so we have to watch the propaganda and the misspeak and everything that's in the news. This is everything about immigration is legal. Everything about, I'm saying, when I say legal, I mean it is driven by the law. Everything about immigration is driven by the law. Almost any and everything you hear on the news is spin and propaganda. It's somebody's opinion. It's the way they want things to be. That's what that is. They are not recounting the law. They are not stating what the law is. They're not doing it. They're saying, well, Democrats are letting too many people in. Well, no, right now it's a Republican administration, and you better bet people that are showing up at the border at these stations, they're getting in. They don't show you that part. They don't want to tell you that part. So let's see if there's questions before I go. Let's see. I learned a lot of new information. Okay, great. I'm glad that people are learning a lot of information. Okay, good. Okay, I don't necessarily see any questions, but as always, you can get on the YouTube or my Facebook or anything, and you can post questions where I post it for this podcast, and then I can try to answer them there. And then usually like maybe pick it up on my next podcast as well. So I hope you guys have the best day and a good night. And thank you so much. I'll stop my recording.
Thank
Cool.
you. This was
Of course.
awesome.